Welcome to Mind Shield. We protect the mind and pursue the truth. Let's get started.
What happens when a person reports a form of harm that does not fit the categories of the systems built to protect them? That is what this briefing is about. Systemic blind spots. Not just one failure, but a convergence of failures. A place where technology moves faster than law, where medicine defaults to familiar labels, and where the victim is left standing in the middle of a machine that cannot recognize what is happening. This slide shows the trap clearly. On one side, unregulated spectrum and emerging technical capability. On another, legal lag, where statutes trail behind the methods being used. And on the third, psychiatric dogma, where reports that sound strange are often absorbed into diagnosis before investigation. Where those three circles meet, the target gets cornered. That red center is the trap. Electronic harassment, or any alleged covert neurosensory intrusion, creates a special kind of victimization because it lives in the negative space of modern systems. First, the medium itself is hard to isolate. We live in a dense ocean of RF, wireless infrastructure, satellite traffic, smart devices, and overlapping commercial signals. In that environment, something harmful can hide inside what looks ordinary. Second, the weapon space is muddy. Dual-use technologies are everywhere. Systems built for communications, sensing, tracking, and behavioral data collection can also create pathways for abuse. Capability and deniability grow together. That is the ugly little magic trick. And third, the response system breaks down. Law enforcement wants physical proof. Medicine wants symptoms to fit known categories. Institutions want a familiar box. But the person reporting harm is often describing something that fits none of them cleanly. So the victim is not just attacked, they are structurally stranded. To understand the problem, we have to understand the environment. Modern cities are signal jungles. Wi-Fi, cellular networks, GPS, satellite downlinks, mesh systems, radar, Bluetoothed private wireless infrastructure, industrial electronics, smart buildings, connected vehicles. That matters because detection becomes a needle in a haystack problem. If a harmful signal exists, it does not arrive in a vacuum. It arrives buried inside a crowded electromagnetic environment that already looks chaotic to most people, and even to many institutions. And passive infrastructure matters too. Buildings, reflective surfaces, moving vehicles, dense wiring, and urban geometry all complicate attribution. In plain English, even when something weird is happening, the environment itself helps conceal it. So the question is not only, could a signal exist? The question is, could a signal hide inside the modern environment long enough to make proof difficult? That is where this gets dangerous. Now we move into regulation. The FCC is built to manage commercial interference, licensing, emissions, and technical compliance. Its core function is not to investigate every novel form of biological aggression or individualized harassment claim. That is a major blind spot. If a signal disrupts an airport system, a licensed band, or a telecom service, regulators know what bucket to place it in. But if a person reports physiological effects, cognitive disruption, internal sound perception, or targeted interference without obvious broadcast disruption, the system often has no clean pathway. No box means no response. And that is one of the most maddening realities here. A thing can be real enough to harm, but still invisible to the institution because the institution was not designed to look for that category of harm in the first place. Not everything outside a mandate is fake. Sometimes it is just politically homeless. This is where the conversation shifts from, "that sounds crazy," to "hold on, let's be adults." The idea that electromagnetic energy can interact with human perception is not pure science fiction. The Frey effect showed decades ago that pulsed RF energy could produce auditory perceptions in humans under certain conditions. Then, over time, patents and technical concepts emerged around remote monitoring, modulation, and radio frequency-based effects. Now, let's be disciplined here. Patents are not proof of deployment. A patent is not a confession. It is not a field report. It is not courtroom evidence that a specific crime happened to a specific person. But patents do matter for one reason. They destroy the lazy argument that the mechanism is automatically impossible. Once possibility enters the room, investigation has to become more serious. And that is the line this briefing keeps drawing: not belief without evidence, and not dismissal without thought. If we think in terms of a modern kill chain, the logic becomes easier to understand. You have acquisition. A target is found or tracked. You have delivery. Energy, signal, or stimulus is directed. You have sensing and feedback. Responses are monitored. And you have adaptation. Parameters are adjusted to maximize disruption. That loop becomes even more dangerous when automation enters the picture. A closed-loop system does not need a dramatic sci-fi control room. It can be iterative, data-driven, and partly automated. Small adjustments, constant calibration, minimal exposure, maximum ambiguity. That is what makes these models so difficult to confront. The public still imagines giant death rays and movie villains stroking a cat in a volcano. Reality, if abuse exists, is usually uglier and more boring. Modular systems, plausible deniability, and enough technical noise to confuse everyone downstream. This is the anatomy of a perfect crime. A physical crime usually leaves residue: a shell casing, a bruise, a broken lock, DNA, video, something that a detective, a doctor, or a jury can hold on to. A directed or transient energy event does not behave that way. The evidence may vanish almost instantly. Detection may require specialized instruments. The cost barrier is high. The timing window is narrow. Consumer gadgets are usually useless for serious forensic capture. And the symptoms themselves do not help much. Headaches, ringing, vertigo, sleep disruption, cognitive fog, anxiety, pressure sensations. Those are real experiences, but they are also nonspecific. They can be folded into dozens of explanations. So the victim enters the system with the worst possible hand: high distress, low proof, and symptoms that are easy to reinterpret. That is not just unfortunate, it is structurally devastating. Law trails capability. That has happened over and over in history. We have statutes for physical stalking. We have statutes for hacking, identity theft, wire fraud, and harassment by known categories. But when the complaint involves remote biological intrusion, cognitive targeting, or non-contact interference, the legal vocabulary often falls apart. No statute, no category, no code to cite. And when police cannot classify an act, they usually do not investigate it as a crime. They route it elsewhere or dismiss it. That is how legal invisibility works, not always through conspiracy, sometimes through category failure. The result is brutal. Conduct can be deeply harmful while remaining functionally unrecognized because the legal system has not updated its map. The victim is told, in effect, "We do not have a name for this, therefore it is not happening." That is bad logic, but it is common logic. Now we reach the most dangerous turn in the trap. The person seeks help. They describe voices, zaps, pressure, interference, sleep disruption, or patterns of targeted distress. Medicine hears those words through an existing diagnostic framework. And once that process starts, The complaint is often translated immediately into internal causation, not what external mechanism should be ruled out. But what disorder does this resemble? That creates a catch-22. To report the experience honestly, the victim has to describe symptoms that sound bizarre. But the more accurately they describe them, the more likely the system is to reinterpret them as pathology rather than testimony. So the act of asking for help can destroy credibility. The person is not only suffering, they are being converted in the record from witness to patient, and from patient to unreliable narrator. That is the medical trap. This pattern has historical echoes, and we should not be naive about that. Psychiatric labels have been used before to neutralize inconvenient testimony, especially when someone describes threats that institutions do not want to confront or cannot easily verify. In the Cold War, political dissent could be folded into pathology. Today, something similar can happen in a more modern form. Individuals describing surveillance, coercion, or targeted intrusion may be stripped of credibility before serious technical inquiry ever begins. That does not mean every strange claim is true. Discipline matters, evidence matters, critical thinking matters. But history warns us about something very specific. When power meets ambiguity, institutions often protect themselves first. And one of the cleanest ways to make a difficult testimony disappear is to relabel it. No blood, no statute, no crime, no investigation. Just a file, a diagnosis, and a closed door. This is where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. When diplomats, intelligence personnel, or other state-linked actors report strange acoustic or physiological events, the system treats the claim as a security matter. It becomes an incident, a health attack, a national concern, something worth briefing, studying, and debating. But when civilians report similar patterns, the default response is often ridicule, dismissal, or psychiatric reduction. That double standard matters. It tells us that institutional credibility, not just symptoms, determines whether a claim is treated as a possible external attack or a personal delusion. And that should bother everyone, because truth does not change depending on your badge, your clearance, or your zip code. If a mechanism is plausible enough to investigate for officials, then civilians reporting overlapping phenomena deserve investigation too, not automatic erasure. Now we put the whole machine together. An attack or harmful event occurs. The victim seeks help. Law enforcement sees no statute or no physical proof. Medicine sees symptoms that resemble known disorders. Credibility collapses. And because credibility collapses, the original complaint is never seriously investigated. So the cycle feeds itself. No proof leads to dismissal. Dismissal prevents investigation. Lack of investigation prevents proof. And the attack, or whatever the underlying cause may be, continues with impunity. That is the vicious cycle. The victim is not only stuck in suffering, they are stuck inside a system that manufactures its own ignorance and then calls that ignorance evidence. That is bureaucratic alchemy at its worst. There is, however, a crack in the wall. The rise of neurorights, cognitive liberty, and mental privacy signals that legal systems are beginning to recognize the brain as a domain that may require explicit protection. That is a major conceptual shift. Once law acknowledges that mental privacy exists, it also opens the door to acknowledging that intrusion into cognition, perception, or brain-linked data is a real category of harm worth defining and defending against. Chile is often cited here because it moved early in this direction. That does not solve the entire problem, but it does something important. It creates precedent. And precedent matters because law rarely leaps. It shuffles forward in awkward shoes, mumbling to itself, decades late. Still, movement is movement. So, what do real solutions look like? First, regulatory reform. Institutions need mandates broad enough to examine biological interference, and not just commercial signal conflict. Second, medical reform. Before defaulting to psychiatric explanations, there should be protocols for ruling out environmental and RF-related factors where appropriate. Not because every case will prove external causation, but because investigation should come before reduction. Third, technical democratization. Detection cannot remain the privilege of governments, defense contractors, or elite labs. Public access to affordable wideband monitoring tools and better open-source forensic methods would change the battlefield. And finally, language discipline. If you cannot name a problem in a credible, structured way, institutions will eat the story alive. Closing the gaps means building systems that can actually see what currently falls between them. The so-called targeted individual phenomenon may not be one thing. It may contain noise, misinterpretation, real harm, false attribution, emerging technical abuse, and systemic confusion all mixed together. But that is exactly why denial is so dangerous. Because when institutions respond to ambiguity with ridicule instead of investigation, they do not solve the problem. They make it worse. They reward bad actors, isolate victims, and teach the public that if a crime is weird enough, the system will blink and look away. This briefing is not asking for blind belief. It is asking for a modern response to a modern blind spot. Better definitions, better tools, better science, better law, better medicine. And above all, a system capable of saying, "This is unusual, but we will investigate it anyway." Because the cost of denial is not abstract. It is paid in credibility, safety, justice, and human lives.